I think Pete wants me to stand here. I tend to wander. I loved your searching for knowledge. That's beautiful. Let me tell you the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom is the application of knowledge, and that's my wish for you. If you learn something great, if you don't apply it, not so good, right? So I want to teach you things that you can put into play immediately to help yourselves, help your families, help the people you train and take care of. So I don't know how much I need to say about any of these people. Lots of fun working with Evander Holyfield, Yao Ming. The year that they came in, they were both in the list of top 100 most famous people on the planet. London Fletcher may actually retire. He may not play this season, but 16 seasons NFL, fourth leading all-time tackler, just behind Ray Lewis. And if he plays this year, he'll break every record. He never missed a start. When I saw him 5 years ago, he said, yeah, I just want to get another year. How about 5 at $10 million a year? Not a bad extra 5 years, right? Candice Michelle was kind of famous, GoDaddy girl. I was a backstage chiropractor for World Wrestling Entertainment, so I like to balance structure, I like to balance chemistry, I like to get the best out of anybody I see. Someone asked me who I had win gold in London. That's Bianca Knight, 4x100 gold medal winner. I had about 20 athletes in London. Bottom left, Michelle Carter, when I saw her, she was number 6 in the world in shot put. She ended up number 2, not bad. Tyson Gage did beat Usain Bolt in 2010 World Championship. Michael Bennett won the Super Bowl last year. He was barely able to function when I saw him 2 years ago. In fact, he said he wasn't even sure he could play. We got him back, we got him playing, he got a Super Bowl. He signed a $28.5 million contract. Charles Poliquin, Paul Chek, Erwan Lepore, all these people have hired me to train their trainers sports nutrition. And these are the basics of sports nutrition, right? I'll just tell you straight up. What do? We maximize fuel. You don't go very far without fuel. What's the primary thing you need for fuel beyond 6 seconds? Yeah, 3 seconds, you just need stored ATP. It's there, you have it. You got another 3 seconds, that's creatine phosphate. Then you go into anaerobic glycolysis, but ultimately you need oxygen. Oxygen drives 94.4% of human energy by something called the mitochondria. So I will share with you how we're actually going to increase oxygen. You'd be surprised at what the #1 enemy of oxygen is. It's actually inflammation. Because there's a molecule that dilates our blood vessels called nitric oxide. Right? Pete asked me, what do you think about beetroot? Well, beetroot's cool. It's a very strong nitrate donor. Nitrates are reduced in the body to nitrite, are reduced to nitric oxide, dilate blood vessels. That's cool, right? I use beetroot. Like it. But don't use it by itself. What if you had something that controlled inflammation, actually was a nitrate donor, enhanced the immune system, alkalized the system? These are massive things that we need to do. We need to minimize damage, right? Now, it's true, we need to be cautious, especially this room, to not overtrain. Most people sit on their butts too much, they undertrain, but people like you, like me, I have a tendency to, if I can, I keep pushing, I overtrain, or the term I tend to use is I under-recover. After you train, you're going to create inflammation. If you control inflammation, you control the recovery. Oxidize, you'll damage the cells. Then, of course, we need hormones, right? We want to have both anabolic hormones maximized, growth hormone, testosterone, and we want to have our anti-catabolic hormones. Anybody know the hormone that's both anabolic and anti-catabolic that's directly under our control? It's insulin. You need to make insulin your friend, and for most people, insulin's actually the enemy. And then, of course, we want to optimize recovery, and don't miss out on sleep. It's absolutely powerful. So all the athletes that you saw, and I'll argue every athlete that I've worked with, it tends to have about a personal best within the first 2 weeks of working with me. There's 2 major things I do. I balance their core, and I change their pH. pH is absolutely critical. So this book is called Alkalize or Die. It's actually pretty accurate. If you have too much acid in your system, everything becomes inefficient. I'll show the graph there later. Pete mentioned cancer. I've lectured on the topic nutrition and cancer, international conferences for over 15 years. I've had people stage 4 cancer sent home to die that are alive today and cancer-free because we changed the environment. Best lecture I went to on cancer 25 years ago, PhD researcher Dean Black. He walks in the room with 200 doctors and he asked the question, how does a hurricane start? The answer he wanted was a hurricane starts when conditions are just right. He then asked, how's a tornado start? Tornado starts when conditions are just right. How's cancer start? Cancer starts when conditions are just right. How's cancer go away? Change the conditions. Now, what are those conditions? Low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid. Now, here's the crazy thing. I'll ask people, I'll say, which conventional medical therapy addresses any of those conditions? What's the answer? None of them. Which conventional medical therapy makes those conditions worse? The answer is every one of them. So if you don't address cause and effect, you don't have a very good track record, and they're no better than they were 50 years ago in cancer survivability. That's a crime. With what we know, we need to address low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid. By the way, would you be surprised that that's exactly what enhances sports performance and sports recovery? So one of my favorite articles that I won't show you is entitled "The Application of Sports Nutrition in Critical Care Medicine." They came to realize that the same thing that keeps people from dying is the same thing that keeps athletes at their best, or takes them to their best. And I've used this in clinical practice for 22 years. This is one of the European journals, right? They talk about this effect of acidosis. And they say that a nutrition intervention with alkalizing nutrients is absolutely critical. So in my hand, I have a cup of coffee, acid or alkaline. What would you guess? Don't guess. What is a typical cup of coffee? Profoundly acid. So what I do is I drink a coffee that has Ganoderma in it that, guess what, is alkaline, an anti-inflammatory, and a nitrate donor, and an antiviral, an immune supporter, and on and on and on. I'll show you this data. Because if I had to pick just one nutraceutical, that would be it. It would be the king of herbs, the one that has 1,800 medical studies. When you look at performance in acid, this is the speed graph of an elite sprinter. Notice they start dropping after 60 meters. If you know a guy named Louis Simmons from the States or Dave Tate, they talk about their sets are 6 seconds. Why? Because at 6 seconds, you got 3 seconds ATP, you got 3 seconds creatine phosphate. After that, you're going to slow down. Your maximum intensity is already done. But guess what? There's not many people in sport that have a 6-second window that they can play. So after that, they start dropping, and they drop because of lactic acid. On the top left is what's known as the Cori cycle, and I don't want to get too technical with you, but what we do, I didn't want to do that one, is we got this molecule of glucose, we burn it for energy, we pull off 2 ATP, and we create 2 lactic acid. Lactic acid is beautiful, don't get me wrong. Lactic acid stimulates growth hormone, the body's most powerful fat burner. If you can learn to maximize lactic acid, you do your body a lot of good. But notice this 2 lactic acid goes back to the liver, and it takes 6 ATP to neutralize it. That puts you in a phenomenal energy debt. And that's why these people are that lean. That's why these anaerobic athletes are so much leaner, and every one of my sprinters looks like that. They are just absolute powerful beasts, and they do a lot of lactic acid training. But what's the downside? So here's a graph of enzyme activity versus pH. When your body pH is ideal, this is a very narrow window. You go off in either direction, and most people fall to acid, right? No, everybody falls to acid. Then their enzyme activity drops. So does their hormone activity. So if your body's horribly acid, do you respond as well to growth hormone? Yes or no? Not a rhetorical question. If your body's acid, do you respond as well to growth hormone? No. If your body's acid, do you respond as well to testosterone? No. Do you respond as well to thyroid hormone? No. Do you respond as well to insulin? No. How about these 75,000 human enzymes running the show of every single cell in your body? Do you respond as well? No. So you'd be surprised that everybody that I test, very, very precisely, they're all 2 acid. Every single one of them. So when I alkalize them, every single one of them gets better. Here's a sports study, right? They did it on cyclists. Not the best way to do it, but they actually gave them bicarb. They infused them with bicarb, baking soda. And they actually found that they could perform a whole lot better. It's just simple application. We don't want to use something like baking soda. We want to use something nutrient-dense with other processes and properties. And what we'll do is use Ganoderma. Now, one of the things that I've done is I've been an expert witness in court on natural cases. I'm for the natural guy, not against, right? You want to hire me to support a natural guy, I'm available, right? So when you look at this PubMed ID at the bottom of this, and it doesn't read as well on this screen, but that means it's registered with the National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health. My first court case, by the way, all 3 won. Great attorney supporting this guy. He says, you know, they're going to ask you a question when you're on the stand. They're going to say, hey, doctor, in your opinion, and then they'll ask a question, and here's how I want you to answer it. I'd rather not give you my opinion. I'd rather give you a published fact. Doctor, in your opinion, I'd rather not give you my opinion, I'd rather give you a published fact. In your opinion, I'd rather not give you my opinion, I'd rather give you a published fact. Who do you think won? The guy that sat there and gave his opinion, or the guy that just cited off published fact after published fact after published fact after published fact? So let me share some published facts about Ganoderma. It treats a sick liver. That's what hepatopathy is, including chronic hepatitis. Yeah, I have people with hepatitis C that were progressing towards liver transplant, severely elevated enzymes, jaundice. Get it under control with Ganoderma. We'll show you how and why. Nephritis, which is a sick kidney. We had a guy that we met Monday night. He's just been drinking the coffee with Ganoderma in it. All of a sudden he realized his dialysis was getting better. He hadn't even drank in a week, and he's getting feeling back in his feet. Now think about it. When your nerves to your feet die, then your foot dies, and they're going to cut it off. And that's what he was leaning towards. So he's getting feeling back in his feet in just a week. That powerful. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, arthritis, including rheumatoid. Neurasthenia is just basically depression and apathy. Insomnia. Yeah, coffee that increases deep sleep. Really, really powerful. Sleep is your body's most important and potent anti-inflammatory. By the way, that's when you release the most growth hormone. That's when healing and repair takes place. You need to get some good sleep. Ganoderma induces deep sleep. Insomnia, bronchitis. Right now we're talking about a silent inflammatory condition of the airways. This prevents them from dilating. So now we dilate the airways. You think that might have an application in sport and sports nutrition. Gastric ulcers, hardening of the arteries, low white cell count, diabetes, anorexia, and cancer. And these are all published facts. Here's the interesting thing. Let me go back to that. The laser's right there. So notice it says Ganoderma is a bitter mushroom with remarkable health benefits. So if it's profoundly bitter, how many of you would want to drink it on a regular basis? Pretty much nobody I know, right? But here's the beautiful news. The company that's got the patent on the process can extract the nutritive components of Ganoderma, put it in coffee, tea, hot chocolate, soap, and toothpaste in a way that it actually tastes really, really good. Two of the original emperors of China, these guys were so famous and so powerful for the country, they have their own mountain. These heads are over 300 feet tall, really, really powerful, right? Here they are in the park holding Ganoderma. Back then it was reserved for the royal family. If you took Ganoderma, they'd cut your hand off. Right? You wouldn't want to do that. So inflammation, you're probably familiar with it in terms of training. You're going to create some level of inflammation. Inflammation precedes repair. That's perfectly fine. But break down the word, it literally means fire within. If you're burning up from the inside to a high degree, guess what? You're going to break down. And that's what most people are doing. All chronic disease has inflammation as a component. When it gets out of control, you burn up, you burn out. They literally have a term in the literature called inflammaging. And guess what? The two major factors that determine how rapidly your cells age, your body ages, is inflammation and stress. One of the things that inflammation does is it absolutely devours something called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide was actually Molecule of the Year, if you can believe it. There it is, 1992. The team that discovered it won a Nobel Prize. Now, doctors knew for over 100 years that if someone was having chest pain, they could give them nitroglycerin in their mouth, the chest pain would go away. How cool is that? So this team started looking and saying, okay, what is it in this nitroglycerin that actually dilates blood vessels? They narrowed it down to nitric oxide. It was so powerful, they won a Nobel Prize. Now, nitric oxide is really, really good for the heart, dilates blood vessels. It's good for the brain. There's literally something called neuronal nitric oxide. It's phenomenal for the immune system, and amazingly, it's super good for sexual function. And it was the birth of Viagra. So I'll share with you an interesting story. The drug company is going to figure out, okay, nitric oxide is really good. How do we make it last longer? So they created a drug that would actually block the breakdown of nitric oxide. It was called a phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor, known as sildenafil. So they gave it to guys that had cardiovascular disease. A few weeks after taking it, they called their doctors back and said, hey, something weird is happening. I said, what are you talking about? They said, yeah, we're starting to get erections again. You gotta be kidding me. They tried it out on a few people. They said, whoa, we're going to scrap this as a blood pressure drug. We got a sex drug. We got a blockbuster. Right? And that was the birth of Viagra. So they're still working on that. And I'll show on getting a good nitric oxide drug for blood vessels. because it's very, very important for the health of the nation, and I'll share with you one of the researchers. So this is a form of nitric oxide that's actually called endothelial nitric oxide. Over here we have inflammatory nitric oxide. Notice endothelial nitric oxide dilates blood vessels to bring oxygen and nutrients to the tissue. Absolutely critical to sports performance and recovery. Notice the inflammatory nitric oxide actually puts the brakes on the mitochondria. Mitochondria make 94.4% of human energy. So notice it says inflammation increases inflammatory nitric oxide and blocks mitochondrial respiration and energy production. If you could read the bottom of it, it would absolutely say that if it gets too severe, the cell will absolutely die. It will starve because it can't run along. What happens in acute inflammatory episode is that you increase inflammatory nitric oxide 1000x. That's absolutely massive. Now when you train hard, guess what? You increase nitric oxide about 600%. You need to have available what you need to have to dilate the blood vessels to give your body what it needs to survive. So there's a python swallowing a sheep, and that's my visual picture of inflammation devouring nitric oxide. Now, why are most people inflamed? Actually, we all are, but most people to a high degree. The term in the literature is metaflammation, metabolically induced inflammation. I talk about the Magnificent Seven. You can Google me, and a trainer from Dubai actually did a 1-hour webinar with me on weight loss and the Magnificent Seven. I tell people the Magnificent Seven, the things that keep you healthy. You need to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right, every single day. And if you don't do that, you'll be inflamed, you'll be sick, and you'll have a life of misery and then ultimately die, right? Which is, of course, not what we want. Now, Nathan Bryant was one of the Nobel Prize-winning researchers, and he's got a book called The Nitric Oxide Solution. So notice what it says. Nitric oxide signals the inner walls of the blood vessels to relax. That means oxygen gets to the tissue. It also eliminates dangerous clots. I'll show you a reference on that. It lowers high blood pressure and reduces plaque. It actually reduces heart disease. So what he said is they started looking at all these Chinese formulas known to have profound nitric oxide bioactivity, including Ganoderma. Now, since they were funded by the drug companies, he said the next step was to identify the active components in the traditional Chinese medicines, that's what TCM stands for, responsible for producing nitric oxide. Now, I've got an audio interview on my computer with him, and what he said very simply was every single time we took something out of Ganoderma to try to find out what dilated the blood vessels, he said it just simply did not work as well. He said we came to realize it wasn't something in the herb, it was the herb. So I've written the foreword to about 15 different books. The first one was a book called Herbal Virtues, and here's the first line. There's a synergy in nature that can't be duplicated and can't be isolated. Over 80% of drugs are derived from plants. The drug companies say, okay, this plant is good, let's find out in what works, let's isolate it, let's tweak the molecule so we can patent it and make millions. Why don't they just use the herb? Because you can't patent an herb. You just simply can't. So the money's not there. There are 1,800 peer-reviewed medical studies, most of them done by the drug companies, with all those health benefits you saw, because if they could actually find a way to patent it, it would be the next blockbuster drug and maybe the only one they ever need, right? So notice what it says. Ganoderma lucidum completely abolished inflammatory nitric oxide synthase and inflammatory nitric oxide production. This is truly massive. So imagine now if you can dilate your blood vessels, control your inflammation, alkalize your system with someone drinking a cup of coffee before working out that actually tastes good, that they enjoy during and maybe afterwards as well. This reference just simply shows 5 different pro-inflammatory mediators that are all reduced by increasing nitric oxide. So blood vessels are going to dilate, you're less likely to throw a clot, right? You don't get plaquing in the arteries, you get less free radicals, and then you get less sticky cholesterol. All those things are powerful. It's a 106-year-old martial artist balancing on a flagpole. 106, right? What do people die of in China? Old age, What do they die of in the Western world? Every miserable disease, and they start falling apart when they're age 12. The average person in the States spends their final 10 years with a major medical disability. Think this guy's got that problem? Absolutely not, right? So this case, Ganoderma enhances the mitochondria of both the heart and the brain. That's very powerful. The drug companies have problems with drugs because they don't cross generally the blood-brain barrier. Very, very powerful. So in and of itself, this reference mentions is it crosses the blood-brain barrier and enhances brain energy. This is a study where they gave rats a clotting agent, literally a clotting agent. They knew what dose would absolutely kill them. They'd either have a heart attack or stroke and die. So they said, what dose of Ganoderma completely eliminates the clots? 60 micrograms per kilogram body weight. For me, that's 2 cups of coffee a day. For someone big like Ian, that's 3, right? 3 cups of coffee a day. Now, what did aspirin do it? Yeah, aspirin did it at 10 to 20 milligrams per kilogram. By the time you take that dose of aspirin, you're going to have massive bleeding episodes, right? I had a woman that was beating a cancer battle. She was 2 years post her death sentence, fighting a really aggressive bone cancer. She was doing a mix of conventional therapies, medical therapies, as well as all the natural therapies that I recommended. She went to church with her husband on a Sunday morning. When she got back, she was getting out of her car and she hit her head on the roof of the car. She got in the house, she looked at her husband and said, I'm feeling tired, I'm going to take a nap. Never woke up. Her brain bled out in her sleep because of the blood thinners the doctors had given her. Just a little bump on her head, she bled out and died. What's the risk of cancer in the U.S.? A man's lifetime risk 1 in 2, women's 1 in 3. Top male cancer, prostate cancer 1 in 6. Breast cancer, women 1 in 7. People rarely die from a single solitary tumor. So notice it says Ganoderma lucidum resulted in suppression of cell migration of highly invasive breast and prostate cancer cells. These are cells that would metastasize, that would spread, that would be near and difficult or impossible to kill, that would kill the patient. If you can prevent the cancer from spreading, you find it one day, you get it surgically removed, game over, right? The cancer's gone. If you can cut it out, it's out. But when it spreads, that's when it's a problem. What's the worst breast cancer? Inflammatory breast cancer. By 5 different mechanisms, Ganoderma can kill breast cancer cells. When people do chemotherapy and take Ganoderma, it's so good for the brain, so good for detoxifying, that guess what? They feel a whole lot better even through that process. Apoptosis is a fancy word for death, but it's better than death, it's a good death. What do I mean by a good death, right? Well, I could die. I could come in here like a terrorist and put a backpack bomb on my back and blow myself up and I'm going to take down some people with me. That's actually what cell necrosis does. When a cell dies a traumatic death or a sick death, it poisons the environment around it. But apoptosis is like the Eskimo that says, okay, I've lived out a good life. I'm actually going to go to sleep on an iceberg and feed the fish, right? That's what apoptosis is. Everything's packaged up and recycled for the good of the system, as opposed to destroying everything around. So notice, Ganoderma causes apoptosis in leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma cells. Again, there's your PubMed citation. You can take that to court, take it to the bank. In the States, if you get to be 85 years old, there's a 50-50 chance your brain doesn't work. So the number one fear after the age of 55 is absolutely Alzheimer's. So now, check it out, brain research. There's your PubMed. Taken together, these results prove that Ganoderma, notice they call it the anti-aging Ganoderma. We'll get to that later, but it slows aging. And what it does is it prevents the harmful effects of a pro-inflammatory protein called beta amyloid, and therefore reduces Alzheimer's disease. It also can restore function in Parkinson's disease. Yeah, it's that good for the brain. So let me share with you just a little insight to how this works. Whenever anybody has a neurologic problem, there's 3 distinct zones of neurons. There's neurons that are dead. We don't need to do anything about those. There's neurons that are perfectly fine. We don't need to do anything about those. There's neurons that are functional but not functioning. Those are the neurons we need to support. How do we support them? We enhance their mitochondria. So Ganoderma enhances mitochondria. What's the critical nutrient for mitochondria? Actually oxygen. What's the enemy of the mitochondria? Inflammation. Controls inflammation, dilates the blood vessels, enhances mitochondria, is good for even really, really sick brains. A polyquin fluid. Nothing gets you more bang for your buck than sleep. The U.S., 60 million Americans have sleep disturbance. So Ganoderma actually facilitates a molecule called GABA. It works via a GABAergic mechanism. This is the most calming neurotransmitter in your brain. If you take it at night, your body says it's time to sleep, you sleep. If you take it like me with a cup of coffee right here, right now, would coffee be a pick-me-up? Sure. Is GABA calm me down? Sure. So I have this peaceful, calm energy. By the way, caffeine is also a lipolytic. It helps my body burn fat, which is a beautiful thing, right? Good for brain attention. Glutamate, by the way, is the most excitatory molecule in the brain. At high levels, it causes what they call catastrophic neuron degeneration. So, glutamate, by the way, is converted to GABA, only one enzyme step, and Ganoderma facilitates that. I have a friend who went for a ride with his girlfriend on a Sunday afternoon 15 years ago. There was a drug dealer that was fleeing the police in a high-speed chase. They were in the wrong place, wrong time, got hit broadside. She was killed instantly. He woke up a quadriplegic, spinal cord injured right there at the neck. They told him, you'll never walk again, you'll never use your arms. When he could talk, he said, I'll walk again. He was doing Ganoderma and other things. Ganoderma promotes survival and axon regeneration of injured spinal motor neurons. They thought he'd get no function back. He's walked as far as a mile with a walker. Got 80% back in one arm, 70% in another, 50% in one leg, 20% in another, and that's enough with a walker where he can get a mile. You look at the toxins in our world, we can see toxins from over 500 miles in space. They've done fat biopsies of people for 30 years, and they realize we all have at least 700 toxins in our body. The symptoms of chronic poisoning, fatigue, sleep disturbance, intestinal distress, allergy symptoms, headaches, confusion, and anxiety. I said, look, in clinical practice, you get rid of those symptoms, I'd have to do something else, because that's what everybody's walking in my door with. So what does Ganoderma do? It enhances the liver, it enhances the kidneys, and it's incredibly powerful as an antioxidant, right? Now I want to share with you something about exercise. The organ that gets the highest blood flow at rest is actually the liver. Number 2 is the kidney. Number 3 is the brain. Under heavy exercise, which simulates fight or flight, the liver gets compromised, the kidney gets compromised, and guess what? Your brain gets compromised if it's a truly fight or flight circumstance. Ganoderma enhances blood flow to every one of those organs. This is a guy in liver failure. His belly button's sticking out because he's got so much fluid, which is known as ascites. What's going on is your liver makes proteins like albumin and globulin that help to keep fluid in the blood. When the liver can't make that, the fluid spills out all over the place. And by the way, acetaminophen or Tylenol is the #1 cause of acute liver failure in the States. There's an FDA warning bulletin on Tylenol. Right now, all the bottles have the labels on it in the States. But, interesting phenomena, they can kill rats with Tylenol, right? They figure out the dose that kills them. Then they thought, oh, let's try Ganoderma. When they gave the rats Ganoderma and the lethal dose of Tylenol, not only didn't die, they didn't even have elevation of the liver enzymes. They didn't die or they didn't have elevation of the liver enzymes. So guess what? We gave this presentation at a nightclub last night. Amazingly enough. A little different twist in sports nutrition, right? But there's people that mix alcohol and coffee. And I think some of these people pre-dose with Tylenol so they don't get a headache in the morning, right? Just imagine if they gave them Ganoderma. What could that do? It could protect the liver, it could process, they could get smooth energy. They could be healthy while they're doing something maybe less than ideally healthy, right? I met with a woman yesterday morning. She was having a massive migraine that usually lasts 2 days. 3 minutes into drinking her coffee, her headache was gone and stayed gone all day. Here's a real powerful thing. It actually blocks the replication of the HIV virus. Can you pick a nastier virus out there, right? So notice, if you can see it, there's a PubMed ID for this one as well. Yeah, you can take that one to the courts of law and see that Ganoderma prevents HIV replication. Think about someone taking Ganoderma with an early accidental exposure of HIV. Can you imagine that? What if Magic Johnson, one of the more famous people in the world, right? Lakers superstar in the early 90s, what if he'd been taking Ganoderma when he was exposed? Could he have played out his career instead of having to medically retire because of HIV? Interesting question. So I had a patient that came to me sick on all the drug cocktails for HIV. I gave her a detox, I gave her Ganoderma, and at that point I didn't even know that it was anti-HIV. No clue, I just knew it was really good for the immune system. Comes back 2 weeks later, hands me her blood work with the biggest smile on her face. It's like my kids when they came home with their report card with straight A's, so proud of themselves. She hands me this, she goes, what am I doing? This is fantastic. This is the best my blood has looked in 10 years. Well, it was really everything, but I looked up Ganoderma, and yeah, guess what? We were blocking HIV. It also speeds herpes recovery. Not too many people have HIV, thank God. 45 million Americans have genital herpes. There's over 200 strains of herpes, including Epstein-Barr, shingles virus, all that other stuff. We've had people with horrible shingles pain. We give them Ganoderma, the shingles pain goes away. Truly powerful. Also inhibits or kills H. pylori, the causative organism ulcer. So when you look at Staph aureus, this is something that actually kills 100,000 people in U.S. hospitals every year. Antibiotic-resistant form of Staph aureus called methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, or MRSA. We had a woman come in with a MRSA infection on her face. I've got a picture on my computer, but it's a massive wound. They were giving her antibiotics, it wasn't touching it. They were going to have to do surgery to cut a hole in her face so it wouldn't spread to the rest of her body and kill her. We actually packed the wound with Ganoderma spores and coconut oil. Not only did we kill the infection, but the wound was completely healed in a week. It also promotes ulcer healing by increasing mucus synthesis. So you think about generalized coffee. Some people don't handle coffee because it's acid. It gives them acid burn. Guess what? Will kill the organism that's related to ulcer, will promote mucus synthesis, and will heal it, right? Little quick summary of the immune benefits: anti-HIV, anti-herpes, anti-H1N1, anti-HPV, anti-breast cancer, prostate cancer, inflammatory breast cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, staph including methicillin-resistant staph, and H. pylori. And this is all in a cup of coffee. If you can imagine that. Young lady lost 57 pounds just drinking a cup a day. Ganoderma lucidum significantly decreased fasting serum glucose, insulin, and body fat in a diabetic group. Give you a quote right out of Guyton. It says, any excess carbohydrate is rapidly converted to triglyceride and stored as adipose tissue. It's actually carbs that make you fat, right? So when you reduce glucose, you reduce insulin, you reduce your clients from storing body fat. #1 diabetic drug in the world is metformin. At 5 years, it has a 21% failure rate. Metformin blocks the liver's ability to make sugar. That's actually glucose up the top. Guess what? Ganoderma works by the exact same mechanism, which is so powerful, right? Researchers know that if you can preserve or even regenerate beta cells of the pancreas, the cells that make insulin, you can actually cure diabetes. So here it is. PubMed citation, take it to the bank, take it to court. Ganoderma lucidum prevents death of pancreatic beta cells and enhances beta cell regeneration. So yeah, we turn our diabetics around with this as well. This is the first long-lasting remission of type 1 diabetes in the peer-reviewed literature, and it's going to come again and again and again. If you think you've ever had pain, try the pain of rheumatoid arthritis. This is a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of Ganoderma. It was even more effective than the drugs at controlling the pain of rheumatoid arthritis. You know anybody that has allergies? Allergies get better on Ganoderma. My personal favorite is mosquito bites itch less. In my case, not at all. I'm not aware of a single mosquito bite in the last 2 years that I've been drinking this coffee. My weather's different in Houston, Texas. Most days I train barefoot and shirtless in the grass. Love it. Train mixed martial arts. I'm not aware of a single mosquito bite. Now in Houston, maybe that's not a big deal, but I went to Africa twice last year. Once was in a malaria region. Imagine not getting bit by a mosquito there.